Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take that stack of sources you've gathered, all those articles, reports, maybe even just burning questions, and we really dive in, pulling out the insights that matter, the stuff that cuts through the noise. Think of us as your shortcut to being, well, genuinely informed. We try to find those surprising facts, maybe add just enough humor to keep things interesting. And today, wow, we are plunging headfirst into a truly fascinating collection of reports and analyses. We're going to unpack the recent Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, the SCO. We'll also explore the ever-expanding role of BRICS and tackle this really pressing question. Do these groups actually represent a new anti-U.S. alliance? Are they actively challenging the current global order, especially, in the context of the Trump administration? You've asked us to unravel the dynamics behind what some headlines are calling this new axis of upheaval. So our mission today is simple. Move beyond the headlines, understand what really happened, why it's happening now, what does each major player actually want, and crucially, what does it all mean for the future of global power? Get ready, because honestly, the optics alone from that recent SCO summit in Tianjin, China, were absolutely remarkable. It really didn't feel like just a routine meeting. It felt like a deliberate, almost carefully constructed statement to the world. And that brings up a big question. What exactly was China trying to achieve by bringing these specific leaders together in such a visible, almost theatrical way?
It's fascinating, right? Because right from the start, this whole event was just meticulously choreographed. I mean, everything from the welcoming banquets, the seating charts, it was all designed to project a very specific image. China wasn't just, playing host here. They were clearly putting themselves front and center, presenting their vision, their message, to what felt like a captive global audience. And that message, as one source put it, seemed pretty clear. China can convene nations, it can provide global leadership, and importantly, it can offer tangible alternatives.
Especially now when, many around the world see America as maybe increasingly unreliable. So this wasn't just another security forum. It felt like a crucial platform for Beijing to really cement its credentials as a rule maker on the global stage, basically saying, look, we have a different way forward.
That atmosphere you're describing, it sounds less like your typical diplomatic get-together and more like a carefully built political statement. So let's set the stage a bit more for you, our listener. Before we get into the theatrics and the optics, what exactly is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO? How did it evolve into this, well, seemingly formidable gathering we saw in Tianjin? It feels like it suddenly popped up everywhere.
It does feel that way sometimes, doesn't it? But the SKO actually has this really interesting history. And sometimes, as one source called it, a bit of a confused mishmash of functions, historically speaking. It really began as the Shanghai Five. This was back in the 90s, right after the Soviet Union collapsed, a pretty tumultuous time. Suddenly, China found itself sharing these new, often kind of ill-defined borders with four new neighbors: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and of course a very different Russia. So initially its focus was incredibly specific, very pragmatic, just the demilitarization of these new post-Soviet borders. China was largely leading that effort, just trying to ensure stability in its neighborhood.
Okay, so practical beginnings, demilitarizing borders. How did it grow from that?
Well, as regional instability started picking up in the late 90s, early 2000s, partly fueled by, the situation in Afghanistan, the rise of various extremist groups, the scope naturally expanded. Uzbekistan joined in 2001, and that's when the group formally rebranded itself as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO. And with that renaming came the establishment of the Regional Anti-Terrorism Structure, or R8s. That's still operational today, though, it's a relatively small force. It mainly focuses on intelligence sharing and joint counterterrorism exercises.
RATs, okay. But it seems like it's much more than just counterterrorism now.
Oh, absolutely. Here's where it gets really interesting. The SCO has grown way beyond just border security and counterterrorism. Today, it covers this huge range of functions. We're talking about an SCO banking consortium aimed at boosting economic ties. There's a university network to promote educational exchanges. And increasingly, there are discussions around shared infrastructure, trade routes, that sort of thing. And the sheer scale of it is really significant now. When you look at the membership, you've got permanent members: China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and then more recently, Iran joined in 2023 and Belarus in 2024. Just think about the geography. That covers roughly 24% of the world's land area. And population-wise, a staggering 42% of the world's population lives within SCO member states.
Wow, 42%, that's huge. What about economically?
Yeah, exactly. And let's talk about the economic weight, because this isn't some fringe group. As of 2024, their combined nominal GDP accounted for about 23% of the world's total. But, and this is important, when you adjust that for purchasing power parity, which gives you a much better sense of what that money can actually buy in their local economies, that figure jumps way up to 36%. So what that tells you is this isn't just a political talking shop. It's a genuine economic powerhouse, demanding a seat at the global table, capable of independent action, shaping its own destiny. And its rapid expansion, especially bringing in India and Pakistan together in 2017, then Iran, then Belarus, it really makes it one of the world's largest and, frankly, most significant regional organizations today.
That context really helps explain why the SCO feels so prominent now, and it also sheds light on Russia's changing view, which you touched on. For years, Russia had its own security bloc, the CSTO, often seen as a rival to the SCO. But now it seems Moscow's pivoted hard. What's driving Russia's shift to embrace the SCO so fully?
That's a really crucial point, and it's almost entirely a reflection of Russia's dramatically changed geopolitical circumstances. Back in the 2000s, even the 2010s, yeah, many in Moscow did view the SCO with some suspicion. They saw it mostly as a Chinese vehicle for influence in Central Asia, maybe undermining Russia's own collective security treaty organization, the CSTO. Which, Russia often pitched as its answer to NATO, its way of keeping influence in the post-Soviet space.
Right, their own sphere of influence.
Exactly. But the CSTO has largely become, well, to put it mildly, one source called it defunct since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Those post-Soviet states are increasingly nervous about relying on an expansionist Russia for security, especially when Russia's military is so bogged down in Ukraine. We saw this really clearly, for instance, with Russia failing to intervene for Armenia against Azerbaijan in 2023, or for Kyrgyzstan against Tajikistan when their border clashes flared up around the same time. Both Armenia and Kyrgyzstan basically stopped participating in CSTO stuff after that, and Armenia is now actively looking to leave the alliance altogether. It's a clear sign the CSTO just isn't relevant in the same way.
So with their traditional alliance weakening.
Exactly. With the CSTO crumbling, Russia has, as our sources suggest, basically thrown its weight behind the SCO. It now sees the SCO less as a competitor and more as a vital platform, maybe the vital platform. It's a way to resist what its members see as American overreach, and maybe just as importantly, it's a way to show the world that Russia is not isolated, despite Western efforts.
That is a dramatic pivot for Moscow. And speaking of dramatic, the images from this Tianjin summit were just incredible. The headline grabbers, no doubt, were China's Xi Jinping, Russia's Vladimir Putin, and India's Narendra Modi. It looked like a very deliberate, united front against Trump's America. Can you paint a clearer picture of that carefully orchestrated imagery? What message were they trying to send?
The optics were, undeniably deliberate. One source described seeing Modi and Putin literally walking hand in hand to meet Xi. I mean, a scene that almost defied belief, given their usual sort of diplomatic stiffness.
Hand in hand. Wow.
Yeah. And these three leaders, representing something like 3 billion people, looked, as the source said, incredibly chummy, almost like old pals planning something big, not just heads of state at a summit. And this was really striking because, as you know, India and China, and even India and Russia on some things, they don't always see eye to eye. Far from it sometimes.
Exactly. They have serious friction points.
Absolutely. Then you had Xi calling Putin his old friend and Putin praising his dear friend Xi. Modi and Putin even had this apparently candid 50-minute car ride together. Modi later tweeted about how conversations with Putin were always insightful. No, none of this was accidental. This imagery was specifically crafted to project multipolar solidarity. It was meant to unequivocally signal the rise of an alternative governance center to a U.S.-led order. It was a message delivered not just in speeches, but in those perfectly framed photos and video clips.
And it wasn't just the big three, right? There was another notable appearance.
Right. You had North Korea's Kim Jong-un making this really notable cameo. He arrived by armored train in Beijing just ahead of a big Victory Day military parade there. And the picture showed him joining Putin, Iran's president, Myanmar's military chief. I mean, that's a powerful visual coalition of nations, often at odds with the West, all standing together. This wasn't just some polite visit. It was clearly packaged as ceremonial diplomacy, but with real goals. Securing Kim's relevance, getting security assurances, and crucially providing cover for expanding military-industrial links with Russia. Some analysts suggest these links could be pretty significant. There's talk of North Korea potentially sending maybe up to 30,000 troops to Eastern Europe to give Russia more manpower in Ukraine.
It's 1,000 troops. That's a serious number.
It is. And just the audacity of that appearance, openly flaunting these connections, it really speaks volumes about the shifting global power dynamics and the willingness of these nations to align, at least visually, against perceived common adversaries. The message was unmistakable. A strong, visible show of unity, deliberately contrasting with the perceived isolation of the U.S.
Okay, so the visual message was incredibly powerful, almost stage-managed. But let's peel back the layers from the optics. What was the substance? What explicit themes were they pushing? What did they really want the world to hear coming out of Tianjin?
Absolutely. The rhetoric was definitely pointed. It was a clear, forceful call for greater multipolarity in the global order. Xi, Putin, Modi, all of them used the summit as a platform to push this idea. One source called it a thinly veiled criticism of what they see as America's hypocritical attempts to defend its waning geopolitical dominance. But what's really insightful here, I think, isn't just the call for multipolarity. That's not new, right? Many non-Western nations have wanted that for ages. The real takeaway, maybe the deep dive moment here, is seeing this summit as a coordinated, tangible push to actually build alternative global systems, not just complain about the current ones.
So moving from rhetoric to action.
Exactly. It feels like a blueprint for trying to dismantle Western leverage by building parallel systems in finance, in energy, in tech standards, often disguised, as just a quest for balance. China's President Xi, he delivered a particularly stinging rebuke. He denounced bullying and double standards, called to unequivocally oppose hegemonism and power politics. And for many observers, analysts, that word hegemonism is basically seen as a direct code word for Washington and its perceived unipolar dominance.
Right, hegemonism equals the U.S.
Pretty much. And Putin, well, he never misses a chance to critique the West, did he? He echoed those sentiments, made this passionate appeal for a new global system of governance. He argued this new system should replace what he called the outdated Eurocentric and Euro-Atlantic model. And instead, it could actually take into account the interests of a broader range of countries. So it wasn't just about sharing power, it was about fundamentally restructuring the whole global architecture.
And this isn't entirely new thinking for them, is it?
No, not at all. It's important to remember this anti-unipolarity feeling isn't new for the SCO. This desire to rebalance global power, it has deep roots. Way back in 1997 at the Shanghai Five's second summit, long before it was even called the SCO, Russian President Yeltsin and Chinese President Jiang Zemin co-signed this declaration calling for a multipolar world and a more empowered UN. Now, America wasn't explicitly mentioned then, but it was pretty clear, right? The Soviet Union was gone, and both presidents were implicitly worried about an emerging unipolar world dominated by the United States. So this Tianjin summit really just built on that long-standing, deeply ingrained desire to rebalance global power. But maybe with a new urgency, and definitely a more coordinated approach this time.
It's clear that sentiment runs deep. But let me play devil's advocate for a second. Is this genuinely about creating a balanced multipolar world? Or could it just be a different flavor of hegemony, maybe with China at the center, replacing the U.S.-led order they're criticizing? And beyond the diplomatic smiles and the carefully chosen words, China also rolled out that massive military parade in Beijing. What was the point of that impressive show of force? How did that tie into the overall narrative they were trying to control?
That's a really sharp question about the true nature of their multipolar vision. Is it really shared power or just replacing one dominant power with another? Many analysts are asking that exact question, and that military parade definitely offered a glimpse into China's view of its own centrality. It was a crucial, highly visible part of the whole spectacle. Ostensibly, yeah, it marked 80 years since the end of World War II, but its real purpose felt much more contemporary, showcasing China's rapidly advancing tech capabilities and its growing military muscle.
What kind of tech were we talking about?
Well, we expected to see, and we did see, new warplanes, advanced air defense systems, cutting-edge hypersonics, and even this so-called Guam killer missile, a weapon reportedly designed specifically to hit that strategic U.S. Pacific base.
A Guam killer, that's blunt.
It is, and this wasn't just for show. This kind of display sends a very clear, unambiguous message. Internally, sure, projecting strength and competence to the Chinese people, especially maybe with some domestic economic headwinds. But externally, it's a message to the U.S., to Taiwan, to any state that might think about opposing Chinese policy in the region. It's a message of military strength, of deterrence. One analyst said it would surely worry Pentagon planners.
And this is all tightly controlled.
Absolutely. Every aspect of the summit, including this huge parade, was carefully controlled and stage managed. We even got reports that sometimes the audio feed of visiting leaders' speeches was mysteriously cut. likely due to what sources called a kind of paranoia about anything that hasn't been prevented. The overall Chinese goal seemed unambiguous, multifaceted. They wanted to show the world that it has the ability to convene nations, to provide global leadership, and to offer tangible alternatives at a time where many see America as increasingly unreliable. So, this whole meticulously choreographed event aimed to tell a powerful story. A narrative about nations disillusioned with the traditional Western order and about the potential for a new kind of global leadership with China confidently at the helm, backed by, well, growing military might.
And it feels like a narrative that's incredibly deliberate, definitely not spontaneous. This isn't just China asserting itself, right? It feels like a reaction, maybe a culmination of different forces. What are those deeper currents shaping this new alignment right now? Especially, how does the Trump administration factor into why this moment seems so potent for these nations to come together?
That really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer seems to lie heavily in the current geopolitical landscape, which has been profoundly reshaped, frankly, by U.S. actions, particularly under the Trump administration. His America First policies, they've created significant global disruption, and maybe more importantly, a real sense of unpredictability. We've seen these escalating tariff moves, export controls that have really jolted supply chains everywhere. And that's forced many nations into what experts call hedging behavior, basically seeking out multiple economic and political options to reduce their reliance on any single power, especially the U.S.
Hedging their bets.
Yes.
Makes sense. Any specific examples?
Yeah, India is a prime example. They have a very specific and quite painful grievance here. Trump levied these 50% tariffs on India. Sources describe them as the steepest in Asia and detrimental to the country, potentially able to really hurt the country's economy. These tariffs hit key Indian exports, hard steel, aluminum, agricultural products. They directly impacted industries and livelihoods back home. And in India, the perception was this was partly punitive, maybe punishment, for continuing to buy discounted Russian oil amidst Western sanctions on Moscow.
50% is huge, and it goes beyond just tariffs.
Oh, yeah. Beyond the direct economic hits, there's this broader perception of what leaders at the summit called bullying practices from Washington. They characterize U.S. actions as hypocritical attempts to defend its waning geopolitical dominance. The feeling among many non-Western nations is that Trump's policies, like pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, the Iran nuclear deal, his sharp public criticism of traditional allies, have effectively alienated the entire rest of the world. And this is happening precisely at a time when other nations are clearly getting stronger, more assertive. As one Democratic congressman bluntly put it, this approach is idiot foreign policy because it's actively pushing crucial partners like India towards rivals. Now, Republicans might argue America first doesn't mean America alone, but globally, under Trump, the perception often was absolutely America alone. This perceived unreliability, this unilateralism from Washington, it created a vacuum and a powerful incentive for other nations to look for alternative partnerships.
That feeling of America alone certainly seems like a powerful catalyst. And Russia's situation, as you mentioned, has also changed dramatically since the invasion of Ukraine. How has that geopolitical isolation, those heavy sanctions, pushed Moscow even closer to China and driven them to embrace the SCO more centrally?
Russia's motivations are, yeah, to a large extent driven by acute necessity now. It's deeply rooted in its current isolation and the severe economic pressures from Western sanctions. These sanctions have fundamentally rewired Moscow's energy flows toward Asia. They had to shift their economic focus. And this has deepened Russia's need for Chinese finance, technology, and markets across the board, banking, manufacturing, you name it. But beyond the tangible economics, there's also this crucial need for friendly public optics. Putin wants to project this image of global support, defiance against Western isolation efforts.
But the CSTO decline plays into this, too.
Massively. As we discussed, Russia's traditional security alliance, the CSTO, has become effectively defunct. Its members, especially in Central Asia, are really wary of relying on an expansionist Russia, especially with Russia's military tied up in Ukraine. The CSTO's failure to step in for members like Armenia in 2023 or during the Kyrgyzstan-Tajikistan border clashes just shredded its credibility. Armenia and Kyrgyzstan basically pulled back. Armenia is looking to leave entirely. This institutional decay left a huge security vacuum in Russia's traditional sphere of influence. And it really pushed Moscow to invest much more politically and strategically in the SCO.
So Putin's presence there wasn't just symbolic.
Not at all. His prominent presence at the SCO summit was fundamentally about projecting strength and support globally. He was essentially saying, look, I have friends, I have allies, I have strength. Russia is not alone. And that's crucial, not just for morale at home, but also for securing the ongoing economic and political support Russia needs to, well, continue prosecuting its war here on the ground in Ukraine, unquote. The pivot to China and the SCO offers Russia this vital lifeline. It's a platform to resist perceived American overreach and a way to demonstrate its continued relevance in a world that's changing really fast.
Now, India.
Yeah.
India has long been courted by the U.S. as this critical strategic counterweight to China and Asia. So it feels like a pretty significant shift to see Prime Minister Modi appearing to, quote, mend fences with Beijing and Moscow so visibly. What's driving India's famous multi-alignment strategy in this complex environment? Is it just opportunism or something deeper?
That's a really perceptive question because India's approach is definitely far more sophisticated than just simple opportunism. It's a classic, highly refined example of strategic autonomy. New Delhi is expertly maximizing its options. They're essentially leveraging every camp to keep growth high and options open. What does that mean in practice? It means simultaneously buying discounted energy from Russia, which is a critical economic lifeline for India, while at the same time actively courting Western capital and technology. They participate in Western-led security dialogues, and they co-lead the Quad with the US, Japan, and Australia, a group explicitly aimed at balancing China in the Indo-Pacific.
So, talking to everyone, basically.
Pretty much. And those U.S. tariffs, especially the 50% tariffs Trump put on Indian exports, they really acted as a significant catalyst for India's visible warmth towards Russia and China at the SCO summit. As one source noted, these tariffs weren't just economically painful. They felt politically insulting in New Delhi. They were widely seen as an attempt to pressure India into aligning more closely with U.S. foreign policy, especially regarding Russian oil imports. So those cordial optics with Xi and Putin serve as this powerful, unspoken message back to Washington. You hit us with 50% tariffs, impacting our industries, our people. Guess what? We have other options. We can do deals with China and Russia. Think about that before you extend these tariffs or try other punitive measures.
So it's leverage, but also pragmatic risk reduction.
Exactly. This move is also deeply pragmatic, about reducing immediate regional risks. Modi's rare return to China for what's described as a controlled thaw with Beijing after the 2020 border crisis. That tragic crisis in the Galwan Valley where soldiers died is a critical step. Engaging diplomatically helps de-escalate those lingering tensions, reduces the risk of future border flare-ups, and lets India focus its energy on its ambitious domestic economic growth agenda. So the cordial optics with Xi and Putin serve this dual purpose. Signal to Washington that tariff pressure won't isolate India and demonstrate that Modi cannot be pushed into a corner by the U.S. Remember, India imports over 85% of its crude oil. Keeping energy prices low is politically vital for Modi, especially with elections always looming. So continuing to buy 40% of Russian crude is framed as a matter of national interest, domestic stability. India is basically showcasing its ability to navigate these complex global dynamics entirely on its own terms, asserting itself as a truly independent global player.
And then there's China itself. It's navigating its own domestic economic pressures, yet it seems to be seizing this moment to really assert its leadership globally. What is Beijing trying to achieve strategically by leading this charge for an alternative global order? How is it leveraging these gatherings?
China's strategic goals are incredibly ambitious, definitely multifaceted. They go way beyond just reacting to U.S. policy. Even while facing, yes, slower domestic growth and some significant tech headwinds at home, Beijing wants to look like a rule maker globally, not just a rule taker, not just a regional power. And it does this not just with words, but by actively creating and advancing concrete alternatives. This includes convening leaders from across Eurasia and beyond, pushing for its own payment and standards ecosystems.
Like the Beidou system.
Exactly, like its Beidou navigation system, which is a direct competitor to GPS, and pushing for the expansion of the Chinese telecom stack across the developing world, plus brokering energy and infrastructure deals that solidify its Belt and Road Initiative. Fundamentally, China aims to provide global leadership and to demonstrably offer alternatives at a time where many see America as increasingly unreliable. This isn't just about discrediting the U.S., it's about building a viable, functional alternative. The SCO summit, specifically, was a prime opportunity to showcase this convening power, demonstrating China's unique ability to bring together even long-standing rivals like India and Russia under one roof. That highlights Beijing's diplomatic skill and its capacity to bridge divides when there are shared interests.
And they see an opening created by the U.S.
Absolutely. Observers note that the damages Trump has done to America's credibility and image is more than all the done by his predecessors combined. That's not an insignificant point for China. Beijing views this perceived decline in U.S. reliability and influence as a historic opening. China believes its way is totally different from American way. It's positioning itself as a stable, predictable, pragmatic global power, contrasting sharply with what it portrays as chaotic, unpredictable U.S. foreign policy. This is China's deliberate, long-term bid to solidify its position as the leader of a new, non-Western world order, offering a clear, potentially attractive alternative to U.S. dominance, especially for nations in the global south.
It's clear there are these powerful, overarching reasons for these countries to come together right now. But within that shared agenda, what are the specific individual desires driving China, Russia, and India in this new landscape? Let's drill down into China first. What's Beijing's ultimate vision for the SCO and its role in this emerging order they seem to be building?
China's primary goal for the SCO seems quite pragmatic, quite strategic. They want to upgrade the SCO from talk shop to tool of real influence. This isn't just about gathering for photo ops anymore. It's about building tangible institutional economic tools that can genuinely challenge or at least bypass Western-dominated systems. Beijing is pushing hard for developing cross-border payment rails that operate outside the dollar system. They're advocating for adopting their own technical standards, like pushing for widespread use of their Beidou navigation system, the GPS competitor, and expanding the Chinese telecom stack across SCO member states. And they're pushing for quasi-development finance mechanisms. President Xi specifically talked about setting up a new development bank, for example, under the SCO umbrella.
A new SCO bank, like the World Bank or IMF.
Kind of, but under their umbrella. This bank would fund infrastructure and development projects within the SCO framework, effectively bypassing those traditional institutions which are, heavily influenced by the West. Through all these initiatives, China aims to demonstrate its clear leadership of what one source called a bigger-than-BRICS tent, showcasing its remarkable ability to convene and coordinate even rivals like India and Russia under one roof despite their rivalry. This reinforces China's image as a global rulemaker, a provider of viable alternatives to Western-led institutions, and the architect of a genuinely multipolar economic and political system. It's really about building these parallel structures piece by piece.
Russia, on the other hand, you said, is in a much more precarious spot, given the sanctions, the war. What does Moscow desperately need from these partnerships? How do they plan to convert these high-profile optics into actual, concrete lifelines?
Yeah, Russia's aims are intensely focused on converting those strong optics into concrete economic and strategic lifelines. Survival, really. A top priority is securing durable oil and gas buyers in Asia, especially China. With their traditional European energy markets largely shut off by sanctions, Russia is actively reorienting its massive energy infrastructure eastward. We're seeing visible, rapid progress on new pipelines like the hugely ambitious Power of Siberia 2 project.
Power of Siberia 2. That's the one through Mongolia.
That's the one. It's a proposed pipeline stretching over 1,500 miles through Mongolia. And crucially, it would have a capacity almost matching the old Nord Stream 1 pipeline that supplied Europe. This project is absolutely vital for Russia to offset those huge gas losses from its European markets. It provides a long-term, reliable outlet for its energy exports. Russia also wants to cultivate this powerful public narrative that its no-limits partnership with China declared back in February 2022 actually pays off for Moscow, demonstrating resilience against Western pressure. And importantly, India's presence in the room, engaging cordially with both Xi and Putin, that's highly valued by Moscow. It helps Russia avoid total dependence on Beijing. It offers a more balanced appearance, stops Russia looking like just a junior partner, totally beholden to China.
And using the platform to justify the war?
Definitely. Putin skillfully used the SCO summit as a platform to double down on his defense of the war in Ukraine. He insisted the conflict was created not as a result of Russia attacking Ukraine. It emerged as a result of a coup in Ukraine that was provoked and supported by the West. End quote. Now, that narrative is rejected by the West, obviously, but it's crucial for his domestic audience and for maintaining support among non-Western nations. And while he welcomed China and India's efforts to find a resolution, it was explicitly clear any resolution had to be on his terms, emphasizing Russia's continued resolve in its view of the conflict. It highlights Russia's dual-objective economic survival and continued geopolitical maneuvering to maintain its narrative and prosecute the war.
India, with its focus on strategic autonomy, clearly has its own distinct set of motivations for engaging so prominently here, even with those historical tensions with China bubbling underneath. What specific advantages is New Delhi seeking by showing such camaraderie with Xi and Putin?
India's desires are definitely multifaceted, really reflecting that sophisticated strategic autonomy doctrine. Firstly, energy security is absolutely paramount. India needs to keep its energy cheap. That's a critical economic and political imperative. By continuing to buy 40% of Russian crude at those discounted prices, India argues it's acting for its own people. Global oil prices are politically sensitive for Modi's government, right? Keeping fuel costs low is a crucial domestic concern that tends to override Western pressure.
So domestic politics plays a big role.
Huge. Secondly, India aims to vigorously protect its multi-alignment strategy, its strategic autonomy. New Delhi consistently asserts its right to pursue its national interests without being forced into any single power bloc, Western or Eastern. That gives it vital flexibility. Thirdly, India wants to translate visibility into leverage with both China and the U.S., seeking concessions, or at least respect, those very public, cordial optics with Xi and Putin. They're a clear signal to Washington that tariff pressure or attempts to dictate India's foreign policy won't isolate India. It's a diplomatic chess move, basically demonstrating that Modi cannot be pushed into a corner by the U.S. This leverage can then be used to negotiate better trade deals, maybe secure advanced tech transfers, or gain support for its regional goals.
The China relationship specifically, reducing tensions there.
That's a crucial objective, too. A managed thaw with Beijing is vital to reduce border risk after those deadly 2020 clashes in Galwan Valley, which really strained relations. Discussions at the summit included establishing a mechanism to stop those deadly clashes, implementing clearer patrol protocols to prevent future fights. They also talked about easing visa restrictions and resuming direct flights between India and China, which have been suspended for years due to bad relations. That signals a desire for practical de-escalation normalization. Modi is skillfully showing India has options, that it's a power to be reckoned with, and that it won't be dictated to by any external power.
Okay. Beyond the big three, China, Russia, India, North Korea made that particularly notable, maybe unsettling appearance. And other nations are also part of this expanding SCO. What's in it for them? What practical gains are these other nations really looking for from their participation?
That's a great question, because while the spotlight naturally falls on the major players, the motivations of the others are equally revealing about this changing global landscape. North Korea, for its part, seems to be seeking multiple things. First, simply relevance on the international stage, breaking out of its usual isolation. Second, security assurances from powerful allies like Russia and China to counter perceived threats from the U.S. and its partners. And thirdly, perhaps most importantly right now, cover for expanding military-industrial links with Russia. Its presence was packaged as ceremonial diplomacy, sure, but beneath that surface there are likely concrete quid pro quos. Sources suggest this could potentially include North Korea sending, as we mentioned, maybe up to 30,000 troops to Eastern Europe to provide Russia with more manpower for the war. In exchange, maybe they get Russian military tech or aid. It's a pretty stark example of these unconventional partnerships forming.
And the Central Asian members, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan.
For the Central Asian members of the SCO, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, their key desires are fundamentally pragmatic: connectivity, investment, and regime security. They look to China for crucial infrastructure development: roads, railways linking their economies into broader Eurasian trade networks, often bypassing traditional routes. They also look to both China and Russia for support in maintaining domestic stability and dealing with security challenges in what can be volatile regions. Their primary interest is economic development and preventing external interference or internal unrest.
What about Pakistan and Iran?
Pakistan, another member with its own complex challenges, is primarily interested in economic relief and balancing leverage. Facing significant economic difficulties and that long-standing rivalry with India, Pakistan uses its SCO membership to try and garner support, access financing, maybe create a counterbalance against other regional pressures. For them, it's about diversifying partnerships, securing economic lifelines, and for Iran, now a full member, the focus is squarely on finding sanctions workarounds and regional status. Under heavy Western sanctions, Iran sees the SCO as a vital platform to try and circumvent those restrictions through trade and financial mechanisms that operate outside the dollar. It also uses the SCO to enhance its standing in the region, gain recognition as a legitimate, influential player on the world stage. Each of these players has distinct practical gains they hope to achieve, making the SCO this kind of mosaic of individual interests converging on a shared platform.
Okay, so we've seen a lot of powerful imagery, strong rhetoric, clear individual motivations coming out of Tianjin. But the big question, I think, for you, our listener, is Is this truly the birth of a formal anti-Trump alliance, or is it more about strategic positioning, coordinated signaling among nations that, as you pointed out, have their own distinct, often conflicting agendas? How should we really deconstruct the nature of this cooperation?
That's really the critical distinction we need to make. It's crucial to understand that this is emphatically not a treaty-bound alliance, at least not in treaty terms, as we traditionally understand military pacts like NATO. There is, quite simply, no binding tri-alliance between these nations in the way NATO members are bound by Article 5. Instead, as one of our sources aptly puts it, it's far more a marriage of convenience than a formal anti-Trump alliance. And that's largely due to those deep, persistent strategic frictions we've talked about, especially between China and India, particularly along their disputed Himalayan border. The SCO itself is explicitly not a defense pact. It's not a NATO-style mutual defense pact where an attack on one is an attack on all. Its mandate is much broader, much less committal.
So shared interests up to a point.
Exactly. While China and Russia certainly converge on diluting U.S. leverage in finance, energy, and tech standards, that's a clear, shared strategic objective. India's overlap in these areas is far more situational. India practices what we call hedging. It remains deeply wary of China's power and the unresolved border issues. India continues to rely on the Quad at sea, its partnership with the US, Japan, and Australia, which is very intentionally about balancing China's growing naval power in the Indo-Pacific. So while there's a shared feeling of wanting to push back against perceived American hegemony or unipolarity, the paths, the ultimate goals, and the depth of commitment of these nations are actually quite divergent. It's more like a coalition of the willing for specific, limited objectives, not some all-encompassing strategic alignment.
And the nature of the SCO itself and BRICS reflects this.
Absolutely. The SCO is best described as a low-commitment platform that tolerates competing agendas while enabling selective coordination. It's a broad forum where members, despite often having conflicting national interests, can still coordinate on specific security and economic projects without necessarily aligning on all foreign policy fronts. Think of it like a loose club where you pick and choose which activities you join. And BRICS, or BRICS Plus, with its expanded membership now, including Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, UAE, Indonesia. It's another loose association of non-Western countries that seems to be mostly about rhetorically opposing American hegemony. But while they might be united on the idea of opposing American hegemony, these nations are often, as one source put it, fatally divided on how to actually go about it.
Like the BRICS currency idea.
Exactly. That's why proposals for a BRICS currency or a SWIFT alternative things that would directly challenge the dollar's dominance often result in nothing ever really materializes beyond initial talks. The internal divisions, the diverse national interests, they're just too great to achieve truly unified, actionable strategies on such ambitious projects. And this is where India's strategy of multi-homing across different clubs becomes so strategically evident. Its commitment to the Quad with the US, Japan, Australia for maritime security, supply chains, tech cooperation remains central to its maritime strategy. This implicitly balances China's influence and highlights India's strategy of engaging with various groups, sometimes seemingly contradictory ones, to maximize leverage and protect its strategic autonomy without committing irrevocably to a single bloc. It's a very sophisticated, complex dance they're doing.
Given all this complexity, all these layers of cooperation and strategic maneuvering, what are some common misconceptions that we as informed listeners should maybe be careful to avoid when interpreting these developments?
Yeah.
It sounds really easy to jump to conclusions here.
It absolutely is, and it's crucial to resist those urges for oversimplification. There are a few common traps to watch out for. First, this idea that India is leaving the West, that's a significant misconception. India is very clearly hedging. Its commitment to the Quad, for example, remains central to its maritime strategy and its broader Indo-Pacific policy. That indicates it's not abandoning Western ties, but rather diversifying its alliances, playing a much more complex game. It's about maximizing options, not switching sides.
Okay, so India isn't leaving the West. What else?
Second, we should definitely avoid seeing SCO anti-US military bloc. As we've discussed, it's explicitly not a defense alliance. It's a loose forum for broader cooperation on security and economic projects, not a mutual defense pact like NATO. Yes, military exercises happen under its umbrella, but they're largely focused on counterterrorism, regional stability, not collective defense against a major power. And finally, this notion that de-dollarization is imminent is also quite misleading. While there will certainly be incremental workarounds, efforts to reduce dollar exposure maybe through bilateral trade in local currencies, using alternative payment systems, a complete flip of the switch away from the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, that's not on the immediate horizon. The dollar's dominance is just too deeply entrenched. Any shift will be a generational process, not some sudden collapse. These are really vital distinctions to keep in mind so you avoid misreading the situation with either too much alarm or maybe too much complacency.
How is all of this being perceived back in Washington, particularly within the Trump administration? Are they taking these optics seriously, or maybe dismissing them as just political theater?
Well, the Trump administration has largely framed these gatherings as little more than a photo op, kind of dismissing the deeper strategic implications. Trump's top trade advisor, for instance, called it a travesty to see Modi, leader of the world's biggest democracy, getting together with the two biggest authoritarian dictators in the world, meaning Xi and Putin. That framing really highlights a fundamental disagreement within Washington on how to interpret these shifts.
So blaming Modi.
It seems so. The White House perspective appears to be one of blaming Modi for signaling to Washington that India had other options. Trump himself posted online about the U.S.-India relationship being a totally one-sided disaster. There's a clear sense within the administration that America's traditional foreign policy positions have been disrupted by its own global trade war, its sharp criticism of allies. Now, some voices in the U.S. and in the EU, too, express genuine concern. They see this as a group of nations, maybe backing Russia's invasion, actively undermining Western cohesion. But the dominant White House narrative seems to be downplaying the significance of this show of unity as mostly symbolic. And ironically, according to our sources, this dismissive stance might actually reinforce the narrative among SCO members that the U.S. is kind of out of touch with the changing global order.
Looking ahead then, beyond the rhetoric, beyond the symbolic gestures, what tangible shifts might we actually see coming out of these gatherings? What are the specific concrete areas where this increased coordination could lead to material change on the ground? And conversely, what are those inherent obstacles that will continue to limit their ambition?
Right, where the rubber meets the road. We can definitely expect some specific material changes, not just more talk. On energy arteries, for instance, look for concrete steps on a second Russia to China gas pipeline, especially that Power of Siberia 2 project through Mongolia we talked about. That pipeline, potentially matching Nord Stream 1's capacity, is a huge deal for Russia, letting it reroute gas supplies away from Europe. We'll also probably see more long-term oil supply frameworks that lock in discounted volumes for Russia, solidifying China and India as crucial, stable buyers. These are vital economic lifelines for Moscow.
Okay, energy is key.
Yeah.
What about finance, payments?
In payments plumbing, expect to see incremental growth of local currency settlement and trade between these countries, chipping away at reliance on the dollar. There will likely be increased use of alternative messaging clearing systems, like China CIPS, that's their alternative to SWIFT, and more bilateral swap lines between central banks to reduce dollar exposure at the margins. That proposed SCO development bank, if it actually materializes, could further consolidate this parallel financial architecture, at least for smaller regional projects.
And technology,
Yes.
standards.
For tech and standards, we might see pilot projects adopting Beidou, China's navigation system, in SCO member states, and the rollout of the Chinese telecom stack and data standards across SCO corridors, particularly in Central Asia. This is really about building a separate, China-led tech ecosystem. In terms of border management, especially between India and China, confidence-building measures are possible. Things like discussions around patrol protocols, hotlines, and micro-pullbacks at friction points in those disputed areas. Modi and Xi also discussed easing of visa restrictions and resuming direct flights, which would be a tangible sign of de-escalation if it happens. Finally, in SCO governance, maybe a communique that nods toward pooled funds or a coordination facility to bundle small projects, rail, power, ports, even if the initial amounts are modest. It would signal a more structured approach to regional development. These are the areas where rhetoric has the best chance of turning into something tangible.
Even with those shared interests and potential areas for cooperation, there must be significant inherent hurdles still. What are the limiting factors, those persistent obstacles that will constrain the depth, the ambition of this marriage of convenience you've described?
You're absolutely right. Despite the collaborative spirit, the shared grievances, significant hurdles definitely remain. They'll prevent this from becoming a truly cohesive, deep alliance anytime soon. First and foremost is that deep-seated Sino-Indian rivalry. From the Himalayas down to the Indian Ocean, mistrust constrains depth. Those border disputes, like the deadly 2020 clashes, they're not easily forgotten. The fact there haven't been direct flights between the two countries for years. That highlights this profound suspicion, the difficulty in forging deeper strategic cooperation beyond carefully managed optics.
Well, the India-China tension is a major break.
A huge one. Second, there's that clear asymmetry of power and need. Russia needs China more than vice versa, especially now, given its isolation, the war. This imbalance means China can largely dictate terms. At the same time, India resists dependence on either China or Russia, jealously guarding its strategic autonomy. This creates a delicate balancing act for both Russia and India, limiting how deeply they can really commit to a purely China-led agenda.
And the SCO structure itself.
Third, the institutional drag of the SCO itself is a big factor. Its sheer breadth makes execution slow. With so many countries having conflicting aims, diverse national interests, consensus waters down commitments, it makes effective follow-through on ambitious projects incredibly difficult. It's just hard to get everyone moving in the same direction at the same speed. Lastly, and this is a major one, sanctions risk looms large over everything. Even for countries like China and India, the prospect of financing, insurance, and secondary sanctions exposure keeps projects opaque and slow. Banks, businesses, they're wary of incurring U.S. penalties. And that forces many cooperation initiatives into less transparent channels, slowing down implementation, limiting the scale of ambition. These inherent hurdles mean that while cooperation will continue, it's likely to remain incremental, highly pragmatic, rather than truly transformational.
So given those constraints, what are some plausible scenarios looking forward, say, over the next 6-12 months?
Okay, considering those limits, we can probably sketch out 3 plausible scenarios. The loose alignment is maybe the baseline, the most probable path. Expect more summits, selective energy and payments deals, showcase infrastructure MOUs, careful rhetoric. This leads to real but modest shifts in trade and finance flows, but no dramatic overhaul of the global order, just continued incremental change.
Scenario 2.
A managed rivalry scenario. This suggests that maybe India-China CBM's confidence-building measures hold, leading to a gradual de-escalation of border tensions. In this scenario, India would continue to quietly leverage the moment to secure Western investment and tech access while keeping Russian energy flowing, skillfully maintaining its multi-alignment strategy, playing all sides.
And the third, maybe a riskier one.
The sharpening blocks scenario. This represents a tail risk less likely, but more impactful if it happens. Here, maybe a border incident or a major tariff shock triggers harder alignment. This would likely see Quad cooperation deepen significantly in response. China and Russia might accelerate developing their parallel systems. SCO rhetoric could turn much sharper against the West, though even then, actual delivery on commitments might still be mixed because of all those limiting factors we just talked about. These scenarios really highlight the delicate balance these nations are trying to maintain. They're constantly weighing their individual interests against the benefits of collective signaling and, of course, the risks of escalation.
Okay, for you, the curious learner, tracking these complex multidimensional dynamics can feel a bit like watching chess on several boards at once. How can you effectively monitor these shifts in real time? What are the concrete indicators, the practical watch list, that will tell us if this alignment is truly strengthening or if it's remaining mostly that strategic marriage of convenience prone to those limiting factors you've described?
That's a great way to think about it, a practical watch list. There are indeed several concrete signals you can watch closely. First, pay close attention to the diplomatic language. Specifically, the detailed wording in things like the Tianjin Declaration on Finance, Energy, and Standards. Look for concrete commitments, not just vague statements. Do they cite specific targets, timelines, shared funds? That means more than just promises.
Okay, watch the official language. What else?
Second, examine the official readouts from Beijing, Moscow, and New Delhi after future meetings. Do they actually cite numbers, timelines, or pilots for specific projects? This will indicate genuine progress, not just aspirations. The devil really is in those details. Third, monitor U.S.-India relations. Track any significant tariff trade steps between Washington and New Delhi. Do they signal de-escalation of existing disputes or maybe new measures being imposed? That tells you a lot about India's continued strategic balancing act.
Energy and borders, too.
Definitely. Fourth, watch energy infrastructure developments. Look for specific pipeline milestones and long-term oil contracts between Russia and China. Details on volumes, pricing, construction progress for projects like Power of Siberia 2. These are huge long-term commitments if they happen. Fifth, keep a close eye on border dynamics between India and China. Look for any border CBMs, confidence-building measures, and independently verified disengagements in Ladakh or other disputed areas. Sustained de-escalation, there would be a major indicator of genuinely warming relations beyond just summit smiles.
In finance, technology.
Sixth, analyze financial shifts, particularly payment data. What are the settlement shares in local currency? Are cross-border transactions via alternative rails like CIPS actually increasing? Any significant shift away from the dollar in bilateral trade will be very telling. Seventh, track oil flows. Use custom sport stats for oil and refined products into India and China. Does their actual purchasing behavior match the rhetoric about diversified energy sourcing? And finally, look for tech adoption. Are there actual tech pilots happening? Beidou adoption spreading? Chinese telecom maze being signed? Data localization language appearing in SCO projects? These indicators, taken together, will give you a much clearer real-time picture of whether these alignments are becoming deeper, more formalized, or if they remain largely strategic posturing and opportunistic cooperation.
We've certainly taken a deep dive today into this incredibly complex web of relationships and motivations behind the SCO summit. It's clear that while it might not be a simple, formal anti-Trump alliance in that traditional Cold War sense, it is undeniably a powerful, highly coordinated effort by these nations to reshape global influence, to push back against what they perceive as American overreach. It's a really compelling story of nations asserting their autonomy on the world stage.
That's exactly right. This is not the birth of some formal treaty-bound axis ready for military confrontation tomorrow, but it is a louder, much more coordinated bid to shape rules and systems outside the traditional Western framework. It's an effort driven by specific economic needs, a desire for greater autonomy. But, and this is key, this ambition is constrained by those deep-seated rivalries, especially India-China, and by the inherent institutional breadth, maybe weakness of the SCO, which often waters down truly transformative commitments. So what should you expect? Probably more showy summits, yes. More selective, pragmatic economic deals. And persistent strategic hedging from countries like India, rather than hard, treaty-bound military commitments. It's really a game of cautious realignment, not outright revolution.
So as you consider these significant global shifts, remember that in this world of increasing multipolarity, the lines between friend and foe are becoming incredibly blurred. Strategic autonomy is fast becoming the name of the game for many, many nations. What does this mean for the future of global alliances? And how might these marriages of convenience evolve under different leaderships, perhaps in Washington, Beijing, or Delhi? Or how might they shift in response to new, unforeseen global challenges like climate change or even future pandemics? The answers to those questions will undoubtedly continue to shape our world for decades to come, far beyond the immediate headlines we've discussed today.